industry benchmarks by more than 25% because we go beyond clicks and impressions.
It's 2026. Let's mix it up a little bit. Got a fun run on tap today. NNormal Kjerag 2 up against a shoe perhaps maybe you wouldn't have thought of as a comparison. Maybe I wouldn't have thought of as a comparison, but nevertheless, could be fun to see how they stack up against each other. Might also give me a chance to talk a little bit about what's going on with Nike ACG, to be specific. Maybe where some of their trail models are heading in the future. I've got the Terra Kiger 10 on my feet right now. This is not an ACG all conditions gear branded model from Nike. Maybe that's something that we'll have to figure out or just see how they do it going forward. Are they going to continue to release quote unquote regular Nike trail shoes? And will ACG be maybe a separate kind of racing area of the model lineup? Remains to be seen. Will we perhaps see an ACG Terra Kiger in the future? I have no inside information, pure speculation here. As you saw earlier when I left the house, well, for one thing, my van didn't start, but aside from that, I was wearing a different shoe on each foot, Nike and the NNormal shoe, but got to the lot here and decided it might be a better idea to have a refresher on this Nike shoe. It's been on the shelf in the box for quite some time, since the summer in fact, so I thought maybe I'd take a quick jaunt in this one first just to feel it out a little before I go full AB. I am going to wet both shoes on the way back. It's not that freezing today, but I don't want to give the NNormal shoe an early advantage. Quick refresher on the Terra Kiger 10 specs. I do have this kind of marked off as a lightweight comparison here, but it is a 9.5 ounce shoe. So not lightweight by the objective measure, always important, of weight, but we'll talk about why it might feel like it should be classified as a lightweight shoe later on. I measured 30 millimeters at the heel in this one with a spec 5 mil drop, putting it at 30.25. The midsole is Nike's Cushlon 3.0, which is something of a dated EVA foam. They did release the Wild Horse 10 at the same time as this model, and that one does have React X, which is a TPE EVA blend. So you're certainly not working with one of the more advanced super foams on the market in this model here, but it is a little bit on the cushion side compared to some other types of EVAs. Again, I'm not sure the details of how they blend this one. Certainly lacks the bounce and energy return of something like a TPE, either the React X or the Kjerag 2, as we'll see. Foothold is an aspect of this model I talked about in my full review. Just a little bit lacking here, or probably more than a little bit lacking depending on your terrain. The shoe feels, again, lightweight, not in the terms of weight, but in terms of the feeling on the foot. The shape of the upper, the shape and footprint of the shoe feels kind of streamlined around and under your foot. It gives it a nice light feel, even though it's not feathery light like some other really objectively light shoes. But the foothold is an area where once you really put this shoe on tilt in, say, moderate or technical terrain, I feel like the foot wants to kind of shift a little bit on top of the midsole, and that upper just doesn't do a good job of strapping the foot onto the top of the midsole. Kind of like, feel like you slide a little laterally over the top of the midsole here. Did a little bit of up and down in this first half hour here, and I like the rear platform of the shoe. It's quite stable. We'll see how that feels compared to the NNormal shoe. You definitely have a more squarish, stable platform under the heel. If that's what you're looking for, give some stability, but maybe a little bit of transition is lacking under the middle of the shoe. Forefoot is a little bit wider than the Kjerag 2. I find that also nice and stable, but I find them to be almost operating a little bit independently of each other. I don't really notice too much rocker or kind of dynamic feel under the middle of the shoe. Now that could be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. There is also a forefoot protection plate in the shoe. It just strikes me as overall kind of an old school feeling shoe. And again, that may be something some runners might be looking for. I've had comments with the Kjerag 2. Some have not liked the rocker, felt like it was a bit too much, a little unstable, didn't like the sidewall effect in that shoe. I'll compare the uppers when I put that shoe on. But this is, again, I talked about the foam being a little dated, maybe the ride of the shoe feeling a little dated here, but hey, somebody might be looking for that kind of ride. What's new isn't always better. I'll swap my left shoes here. Take a look at this. Talk about this being a nice platform here. It's just pretty square. It's wider for sure than the Kjerag 2. Put them side by side. You could see noticeable difference in width. Also clearly under the middle of the shoe. Although you have no outsole coverage here, it is a wider base if you are going to land on something soft under there where this would actually touch the ground. But again, big difference here. I just feel like this is a kind of nice block to land on, especially when you're going downhill. I like that they segmented here. It gives it a little bit of contouring on the ground. Just feels pretty nice going down there. I don't feel, again, I talk about it being a nice platform in the sense that it's wider and it feels stable, but it doesn't feel stiff or blocky, and that's probably due to this large segmentation over here. You don't have that with the normal. Of course, you don't need it because it is just extremely narrow to begin with. Take a look at the toe boxes here. You have the feel of a wider toe box in the Nike, but again with the foothold, I feel like I need to lace this shoe a little bit tighter than the normal shoe. Matrix upper here, just I think a better overall shape. I don't have to really squeeze this from the shoe down too much to get a good foothold. So even though I think you have more space in the Terra Kiger 10 here, due to the foot feeling a bit insecure, again, I feel like the foot shifts over the top of the midsole, kind of like this kind of way. So I feel like I have to tighten this a little bit more to get the security, or at least some semblance of security that I would want, that I do get in a shoe like the normal shoe here, without having to lace them down too tight. Hope you caught my sock roundup video. I've got the Run Anatomic model here from Sidus, the Jim Walmsley / Hayden Hawks special, unofficially, but those are the guys I saw wearing them. This is not the Hoka guy's shoe. This is the Kilian shoe, of course, but lightweight sock. Both of these shoes, there's not a lot of excess volume in either of these uppers, so you don't really need, although I always like a little extra in the heel. I feel like even with both models, I feel like it would be nice to have a little extra heel padding, but not necessary. Good enough space here. This one certainly, again, feels more spacious than the Nike model, even though it is probably measurably narrower, although vertical volume is more in this shoe. You can see I don't really tighten the bottom laces just because I know that when I'm out on the run, I don't feel my foot moving around in the same way that I do with the Nike shoe. So I'm okay with having this a little bit looser just because I feel more locked in the normal shoe here. Better laces too, by the way. These laces are nice and light, and these are kind of, I don't know what, these are just generic knit laces here. A little bit of a downgrade, although they have the finish line checkerboard here, but these are nicer. Let's see, just feeling them out on foot here. Noticeable is the sidewall of the Kjerag 2. Talked about that in my first impressions video. You feel that along the inner edge of the medial side of your foot. Talked about and also discussed amongst many runners in the comments. I find that tends to go away on the run, but as I just put it on here compared to this one This one doesn't have the sidewall here. You're more kind of definitely flat here. You're on top of the midsole, and perhaps that is a reason why, for me, the normal shoe has just a better, more secure feel. I'm sure this plays a part in securing the foot, allowing me to keep this a little looser, and also giving me better feel with a looser fit up front. So I definitely feel more volume in this shoe. The Nike is definitely shallower over the top of the foot, on top of the fact that I have laced this a little bit tighter. It's pretty striking how the sidewall feel of the normal shoe stands out so much compared to the Nike on my right. We'll see if it dissipates on the run like usual, although it probably won't, being that I have a completely different feel on my right foot. In this case, I might just continually feel that sidewall up against the inside of my left foot. The difference in ground platform is the next most striking thing that stands out. The Kjerag 02 is 8.5 ounces in my size. I've got both of these shoes in US 9.5, by the way. Full ounce lighter than the Terra Kiger here. But again, I think the difference in the platform underfoot is more extreme than that full ounce of weight. The next noticeable difference is the fit around the heel area. Just feels like there's more padding in the Kjerag 02. I didn't detect any problems earlier with both Terra Kigers on my feet, but in comparison here, I feel like I'm just sitting deeper in the heel cup of the normal shoe. Perhaps a little bit more flexibility in this shoe as well, with less width under the middle of the shoe, maybe more flexible foam. That gives me the feel. Just feels like I'm deeper in that normal heel. Feels more secure than the Nike. The Nike padding feels like it's kind of around the top of my heel bone, where with the Kjerag 02 it feels more like it's wrapping above on the sides and in the rear of my heel. Minor uphill out of the parking lot, also a little minor uphill here. Definitely feel like it's easier to get up on my toes, up on my forefoot as I'm climbing in the normal shoe. The Nike shoe feels less flexible. It's not a stiff shoe. I think I'll later on test the flex of each, but just feels like it could be the wide platform, less flexibility. I just feel like I'm easily or more easily able to get up at that incline angle that I want when I'm climbing in the normal shoe compared to the Nike, which feels like it wants to ride a little bit flatter, a little more grounded feel. The Kjerag 02 is also lower to the ground in terms of stack. They're spec'd at a 6 mil drop, but I measured 27 at the heel, whereas 30 millimeter measured in the Nike. So 3 mil less at the heel in the normal, 1 mil more in drop. The Nike has a 5 mil drop. Not a drastic difference in the feel of the drop on the run. Again, we're talking 1 mil difference based on spec. I would venture to say that the normal shoe feels lower even, but that's really hard to judge. It's probably more due to the weight balance of the shoe. More of the balance of weight in the normal is gonna be up front with that wider forefoot and extremely slim midfoot and heel. So it is spec'd at a 1 mil higher drop, but feels a little more nimble. The drop, or I don't know, I don't wanna call it drop, maybe the feel of that drop, the ride of whatever they're calling the drop is, feels more balanced, feels more nimble than the Nike. The Nike at a lesser 5 mil drop just feels like there's more under the heel of the shoe. And there is. Interesting aspect that's only apparent on the run here, AB, is the volume difference in these uppers. I wouldn't have thought or ever mentioned the Kjerag 02 as a high volume upper, but it does have more volume in it than the Terra Kiger 10. Now, I've got nothing to complain about with the Terra Kiger 10 in terms of volume or width or any type of squeezing of the foot, but compared to the normal shoe, definitely feels like there's more strapping down or pressure over the top of the middle of the foot and a little bit down towards the forefoot in the Nike shoe compared to the normal. I really feel that vertical space, especially over the top of the foot at the forefoot in the Kjerag 2. Now, the main takeaway with that fit as it pertains to the normal shoe is that if you like to have a bit more volume in your forefoot, I still think it's a little bit of a challenging shoe if you have a wide foot in general, just due to the narrowness of it. But if you like forefoot space, maybe you have a medium width foot, but kind of like me, like to have the forefoot given that space to kind of spread out and absorb not just the toes, forefoot itself, absorb the ground, impact underfoot. There's plenty of space in the Kjerag 2, plenty of volume to accommodate that. And if you do have a narrow foot, it's going to be a better fit for you in general. You could also tighten down that upper with the lacing a bit more than I have here and get just a good a fit. Again, little slight climb here, slight incline grade. Just feeling smoother, easier, more comfortable in the normal. Feel like I'm able to easily get into a forward lean, whereas Nike almost feels like it's pulling me back a little bit. Maybe less elasticity in that Kilian 3.0 foam there. I mentioned the TK10 is having a forefoot protection plate. I do think you're going to get more protection in the Nike shoe. The foam is a little bit denser. You do have that plate there. It's not a huge difference. Kind of going over some small gravel here. It's not a major difference between these two shoes. And of course, if you're looking at the Kjerag 2 for rugged and rocky terrain, I think you're pretty much banking on your ability to dance around rocks as opposed to plow right over them. There are just very few runners that would look to either of these shoes to, bomb through never-ending technical terrain. Maybe Kilian, of course, would have something to say about that, but he's one of a kind, and those that are of that ilk are, probably there's a lesser amount of those types of runners out there. Speaking of Kilian and speaking of the midsole foam here, you've got TPE here in the normal shoe. Big update from version 1, which was a super critical EVA. Definitely more energy in this second version here. Version 1 just felt super flat, super minimal to me, and I'm sure most runners. Kilian, of course, took this version 2 out at Western States last year and came within 8 minutes or so of winning that race. No carbon fiber in the mix here. Somewhat minimal, as I've been talking about, but it is an energetic enough super foam, whereas if your feet are up to the task, again, it is also a fast shoe. Whew. Checking the watch here, I am clocking sub 5 minute per mile pace here on a couple of these little dips, but 5:15, 5:20 steadily here. Feeling pretty stable in both shoes. I feel like the Nike does allow me to sit back a little more, kind of lean into that broader platform under the middle and the heel, and it feels like the normal kind of sort of urging me to lean a little bit forward, even going downhill that fast. I'd be a little reticent to really mash the heel on this one, especially when it gets a bit uneven, because it's narrow and it's not overly tall, but 27 millimeters on that narrow platform can get dicey. So I feel like if I could absorb a lot of that, talked about in my first run, feeling like that shoe really wants you in the middle of the shoe. So on the downhills, that's kind of the sweet spot to really let it rip and hit those fast downhill paces. While I'm working my way back here, I'll mention once again, I did in my sock roundup video, I've opened up a paid subscription level on my Substack page, and that is going to get you a little bit early access to some of these videos as much as I can prepare them ahead of time. I'll try to give you early access. And also, the main thing is that exclusive first access to ask me questions about shoes, gear, apparel, nutrition, training, racing, you know, maybe particular races that I've done that you want to try out. I've been thinking about a way for quite some time to make that happen as the channel has grown, platform has grown, and the volume of questions, of course, has grown along with it. I know a paid model is certainly not for everyone, and I am not going to stop answering comments and, you know, questions via email. That's another one. I get really long ones over there sometimes. Not knocking it. I love to get feedback and I love to reply to those questions. I just need to have a way where I will at least give those that are interested in supporting a channel a reliable way of having me not miss your question. That's the main thing. So let me know what you think about that. It is, of course, totally optional. Aside from that paid tier, nothing else is going to change. I'm not going to have any walled off video. The regularly scheduled content will continue to be put out. There's going to be nothing top secret about it. All right. It is January 3rd, somewhat close to the car. Wearing shorts, of course, so what the heck. Still cold though. First thing noticeable, I got a few more pebbles in my right Nike shoe there. Probably more mesh openings in that shoe. I don't feel anything in the Kjerag 2 there, so probably more sealed up, at least with that matrix upper. Very first impression here. I don't know if you could hear that, but there's also more squishing going on in my right shoe. Nike has a standard insole in there. I actually forgot, I'll take a look when I get back. Forgot if it's glued down or what the material actually is, but noticeable noise, noticeable squishing and squeaking coming from my right shoe only. Of course, the Kjerag 2 has no insole, and that is a clear benefit of not having an insole. Sock liner in there is no water getting soaked up into an additional layer there, and also nothing to squeak around underneath the insole and the top of Strobel board midsole, whatever the next layer of the shoe happens to be. Gonna give it a few more minutes here, cover this flat across back to the final descent back to the van before I make an assessment on my wet test there. Definitely feels like there's more water circulating around in my right shoe. Still hear the squeaking too. The normal shoe feels, of course, my feet are still wet, my sock is wet, but I don't detect water kind of migrating around inside the shoe like I do with the Nike. Final thoughts here on the Kjerag 2 versus the Terra Kiger 10. I don't think too many runners will have these two matched up head to head as far as directly choosing between one of these two shoes, certainly for racing or maybe even training or an everyday kind of shoe. But in regards to being an everyday shoe, I know there are runners out there that favor that old school feel. Another shoe I'm thinking about is the Merrell Long Sky 2 Matrix. That shoe certainly has more range for racing because it does have the matrix upper and really good foothold compared to the Nike, and it does keep the weight down, so you have an acceptable kind of race type weight. But the Nike here just doesn't keep that weight down. It's kind of a lightweight feeling shoe, or feels like it should be a lightweight shoe, but it's 9.5 ounces, which is not heavy. But for those runners that perhaps, I've heard people talking about the Long Sky 2 shoe in that way, just that old school firmish kind of ride, still a bit protective, not a super high stack midsole, not squishy. There's some inherent stability that you get from that decently wide platform, not necessarily the foothold, but for everyday running, it's probably acceptable. So in that regard, in terms of an everyday shoe, if you do want to go too advanced, or maybe the narrowness of the Kjerag 2, the energy of it, something about the fit, the sidewalls, whatever, doesn't appeal to you, it may appeal to certain runners as far as running the normal shoe every day, although they will be having a KD model coming out, which is more of a training type, less advanced everyday kind of shoe. So I think Normal does realize they have that gap. Getting back to these two shoes here, if that setup of the Normal is too advanced perhaps for you as a runner for every day, the Nike in that regard is somewhat comparable. Not as a racer, not in terms of foothold, not in terms of energy return from the foam, not in terms of stability, nimbleness on the trail. Those are advantages that the Normal shoe, of course, has for certain runners that can work with this type of shoe. I do have a couple of other models in mind. I was thinking of doing like a bigger A, B, C, even D roundup test. Didn't really have the time today, but the Salomon S-Lab Pulsar 4 is a shoe that also have in mind, comparative to these two, more so the Normal shoe, also North Face Vective Sky 2, and another new one, the Mammut Energy Trail, Energy, AENERGY, however you say that, AT Speed. That shoe, I've got the 3 Mammut models that are coming out in the spring, and I just ran a little bit of a hill, 30-second hill repeats yesterday in that shoe, and that is my favorite out of the 3 models. And I feel like there's definitely some comparisons between these lightweight models. Certainly the Pulsar 4, for one, S-Lab Pulsar 4, and the Normal here. Probably hard to hear it. Done with my run now, but there's definitely still that squeaking and squishing going on with this shoe right here. So water test win goes to the Normal Kjerag 2, kind of expected. Swapping into my dry shoes here, quick check. This is the wet tested Kjerag 2. It's wet. I talked about that knit booty type setup here with the gussets in there. Again, it doesn't go all the way to the front of the toe box. I hope you can see in there. It's kind of, I'm pulling it out there. You just have the matrix up in the front of the toe box, and along the edges here with that wider type gusset there, it doesn't feel super soaked here. It's not overly heavy. If I have this shoe in hand, which is the dry one, and this one, not that much difference here. Put this one on. This is the wet Terra Kiger 10 here. It was squeaking when I got back here, certainly. As I kind of remember, the insole is stuck to the bottom. I don't know what the reasoning for that is. Maybe it is a foothold thing. It's not an ortholite. It's not an open cell. It's a closed cell kind of foam there, so perhaps some water gets in on the edges, and it just kind of squeaks a lot. It doesn't seem like the upper itself is holding a lot of water, but this suede, at least this edging, it's not much of it on the inside, but it seems pretty wet. This shoe felt like it held the water inside of the toe box. It definitely felt it squishing around a little bit more on my toes. Seemed to at least maybe not get in as much in this shoe, or evacuate quicker in this Normal shoe here. So again, not direct comparisons here. Look at the flex here. Normal, not as flexy as you would think around this area. Again, good flex here. I felt that climbing, and again, with the weight balance of this shoe, being wider up here and narrower back here, when you're climbing, you're not dragging a lot of that weight behind you. It just feels, this is off the ground at steeper grades, and you're just, in the balance of weight of the shoe is under the ball of your foot. This one, it is quite flexible, even more flexible, I would say, but it's just the wider platform over here. It doesn't feel like you're easily able on the run. It feels like this is feeling flatter as you're climbing up the hill, and just generally on the run, despite the flexibility of the shoe, in comparison, okay, again, we're talking relative to the Kjerag 2 here, not relative to other kind of bigger shoes, but relative to this one, it feels like flatter, like almost this wants to stay down and wants to keep your foot down, whereas this one just, it feels like an easier flex climbing. And again, it could just be the weight balance of the shoe. So this is kind of a fun run here, not a direct comparison, but again, as I talked about, something that certain runners may look for or think about between shoes as far as having an everyday runner. The Nike's not a bad shoe as an everyday runner. If you like that kind of, say, old school type of style, you're not so concerned with foothold, and you're not so concerned with the most advanced foam. Maybe you don't like a bouncy foam, and you're not overly concerned about weight, or at least relatively having the lightest possible weight out there. It's 9.5. It's not a heavy shoe by any means, and at 30.25, it's kind of a mid-stack shoe, although on the lower end these days. But compared to, say, old school days, if again you're of that mindset, 30.25 will be plenty for you, and this may be a solid shoe for some runners out there. So thank you for tuning in once again to Humble Running. Check out www.humblerunning again. Paid subscription is open for 2026, as I described out there on the run. If you want to support the channel, consider that. You may see in the future, as you're watching this now, it's already out if you're not a paid member yet, but in the future, I have filmed this video that you're seeing now a few days in advance. So those that are paid subscribers on my Substack channel will probably get an early look at this one. So if you want to have that early look in the future at videos like this, humble running content, consider signing up for that. Thank you again for watching. I will see you out on the trails. Have a good one.